So we're about to start the 1861 scenario of Victory Games' The Civil War. Let's take a look first at the victory conditions. The 1861 scenario will end after 3 turns, and we add the number of Union victory points, subtract the Confederate victory points, and if there are 18 or more Union victory points, it's a Union substantial victory, 13 to 17 a Union marginal victory, 10 to 12 a Confederate marginal victory, and 9 or less more Union points than Confederate victory points, then a Confederate substantial victory. Both players receive victory points for controlling enemy and neutral victory point cities. Here we have Frankfort, Kentucky. That's a neutral victory point city worth 1 victory point. Nashville, Tennessee, 4 victory points. It is a Confederate victory point city. Evansville, Indiana, 1 victory point, a Union victory point city. Each side receives victory points for enemy and neutral cities that it may gain control of. For example, if the Confederates gain control of Bowling Green, they will receive 1 victory point. Now let's suppose that one of the sides gains control of all victory point cities in a state. Then, in addition to the value of each of the victory point cities, the side will gain a bonus for converting the state. In the case of Kentucky, which is a neutral state, it will be converted into a friendly state, and the bonus will be the total value of all its victory point cities, in this case, 7 victory points. Also, the Union player will receive victory points for any victory point site that it controls in Confederate territory. For example, here is a victory point site, which is the Iron Works in Tennessee, which is worth 1 victory point. Most of the actions in this game require the expenditure of command points, and command points are received by each of the sides via the command points table. During each turn, each of the sides rolls 2 dice and consults the table, which will determine the number of commands received by each of the theaters, depending on the priority allocated to each theater. And each time both sides roll on the command points table, the Confederate player will receive a victory point. And the tally of the times that both sides roll on the command points table is kept track during the turn on the table use track. At the end of the turn, we move the command point table total, the number of boxes equal to the number of times we use the command points table during the turn. And at the end of the game, each use of the command points table is worth 1 victory point to the Confederate side. Another source of victory points for the Confederates comes from the Confederate commerce raiders. During each turn, the Confederate player rolls 2 dice for each commerce raider in the commerce raider's box. The number rolled is the number of Union merchant ships sunk. And we keep track of U.S. ships sunk in the general records track. And at the end of the game, we divide the total number of U.S. ships sunk by 25, and that is the amount of victory points received by the Confederate player in this particular category. Also, the Confederate side receives a number of victory points for isolating or capturing Washington. If the Confederates isolate Washington from the rest of the Eastern Theater, they receive 2 victory points. If they gain control of Washington with a supplied and undemoralized force, the Confederates receive 20 victory points at the end of the turn. And if the Confederate force, which is in control of Washington, is out of supply or demoralized, the Confederates receive 10 victory points. Of crucial importance also to the Confederates is their general situation regarding supply. Confederate supply is determined largely in the amount of imports it can receive from outside the United States to sustain its war effort. And the imports that the Confederate player receives comes through that side's ports. there are a series of port boxes that we see here, which have a number, which is the amount of import points that the Confederates can receive per turn through that port. Some of the ports that begin the game in Confederate control are, however, blocked by Union forces, and no imports can be received through those ports. For example, the Union starts the game here with forces in the fortress of Fort Monroe in Virginia. Those forces are blocking commerce to the port of Petersburg and also into the port of Norfolk. And because of the Union forces here, no import points will be received by the Confederates as long as there are forces in Fortress Monroe. And that's why at the beginning of the game we place Union control markers in these two port boxes. A similar situation happens here in Pensacola. This is the port of Pensacola, but because there are Union forces here in Fort Pickens, the port of Pensacola does not receive any import points, and we mark that situation with a Union control marker. At the beginning of the game, the Confederates have 40 port points available. So if nothing else happens at the beginning of the turn, the Confederates can receive 40 import points. However, there is a blockade abstractly represented in this game by the way of the blockade table. Each turn during the game, we will see an increased effect on the Union blockade. For example, in turn number 1, the blockade is 0%, meaning that all ports will receive their value in import points, and that will be added here in the general records track to the Confederate production value, which is simply the victory point value of its cities, which at the beginning of the game is 100. So you will see that in the first turn, the blockade percentage is 0. So the Confederates will receive 40 import points, and we place it here in the 140 box. Now, during the second turn, the blockade percentage will be 10%, meaning that all import points will be reduced by 10%, and we will see this import marker starting to decrease. When the import marker reaches any number less than 100, the Confederate side will start to experience hardships in conducting the war. For example, if the import marker is anywhere between 90 to 99, the command point cost to build a depot, fort, or to upgrade a fort to a fortress will be increased by 1. If it then is reduced to 80 to 89, entering a naval strength point will cost 3 commands instead of 2, but the prior effect will also continue. And as the supply situation deteriorates, the hardships and increased costs in waging a war will accumulate. In this game, the Mississippi River is critical to the South. The South must maintain control of the Mississippi River in order for its supplies to reach the Trans-Mississippi, and therefore the Trans-Mississippi to be able to wage war effectively. Control of the Mississippi is lost by the South if the Union controls the following Confederate cities: Memphis, Tennessee, Vicksburg, which is here, Port Hudson, Louisiana, and also New Orleans. At the beginning of the game, the Union controls St. Louis here and Cairo, Illinois. So once the Union controls all cities bordering on the Mississippi, the South loses control of the river, and then supply is calculated separately for the Trans-Mississippi on the basis of its victory point cities and imports and the rest of the Confederate states. And that basically means that the Trans-Mississippi will suffer severe supply shortage problems. As you can see, we will be playing this game with unnamed and untried leaders. And you see that the leaders have a number of stars and a number. The original leaders in the game have their ratings and are identified by name. We will use a variant published in the Victory Insider, which was a publication that came with the Avalon Hill General, battle-tested, a leadership system for the Civil War by Glenn Ramon. And we will use the untried leaders variant in that article, and also we will use a special rule for cavalry leaders that allows us to activate cavalry leaders with a reduced amount of command points, but a die has to be rolled with the risk of having that cavalry leader not activate or activate at an increased cost. But we will explain how the system works of untried leaders and the cavalry leader rules as we encounter them through the game. Here we see the situation in the Eastern Theater, especially around Washington. The Confederates have two forces with leaders, three-star leaders, one here in the northernmost part of the Shenandoah Valley with a strength of 2. In this game, each strength point represents 5,000 men, and we have another three-star leader here with a force of 4 strength points, that is 20,000 men. The Union has a force of 3 strength points, 15,000 men, facing the group in the Shenandoah Valley, the Confederate force there, but it does not have a leader. And there are 5,000 Yankee troops here across the Potomac. The main Union forces are in Washington, and Washington is treated as a fort hex, 7 strength points under the command of a 3-star general. And there are also forces in Baltimore, Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, and Philadelphia. This is the situation near the Confederate capital. 10,000 rebels in Richmond protecting the capital, and the Union has 10,000 troops, that is 2 strength points and a 3-star general in Fort Monroe, which is in the Virginia Peninsula, and trying to stop them are 5,000 rebel troops and a 1-star general in a fortification or fort hex. Across, there is 5,000 Confederate troops and a 1-star general in the port of Norfolk. Here we see the opening situation in the west. The rebels have a small force, 5,000 men, with a 3-star general here in Nashville, and the Union have a significant number of troops scattered around Indiana and Ohio. The state of Kentucky is a border or neutral state, and whichever side enters Kentucky, Kentucky will join the opposite side. And Kentucky has a special rule during turn number 3, all rail lines will convert to Union use. So the Confederates have to make a hard choice here whether they want to invade Kentucky and try to capture all of its cities, which the westernmost city is here, Paducah, and try to convert Kentucky to Confederate control before the Union comes rolling in through the railroads in turn number 3. Historically, the South invaded Kentucky early on, thinking that the Kentuckians were going to rally behind their cause, and they were surprised when that didn't happen. But in this game, the South can hold on and let the Union invade Kentucky, or they may try to take Kentucky for themselves. In addition to the forces in Nashville, the Confederates have 10,000 men, 2 strength points here in Memphis, Tennessee, and also some forces here, although they are technically in the Trans-Mississippi, they are close by to the Western Theater. In the Trans-Mississippi, the Union controls all Victory Point cities in Missouri, that is Lexington, Jefferson City, St. Louis, and Springfield. The Confederates have 10,000 men near Springfield, The Union only have 5,000. And if the Confederates do not control one Victory Point city in Missouri by the end of the first turn, that state will be converted into a Union state, and the Union will receive a Victory Point bonus for conversion equal to the total value of Victory Point cities in Missouri. The other border or neutral state is West Virginia, and the Union starts the game with control of Wheeling and also Grafton. The only other Victory Point city is Charleston. So the Union is in pretty good shape in West Virginia also. We are using the untried leader variant, so we have placed these variant markers on the spaces where leaders are supposed to enter the game on a per turn basis. So the original leader counters that are supposed to be placed in these areas, we will place in randomizer cups based on rank. We sort all the Confederate leaders that appear on the turn record track by rank: 3-star, 2-star, 1-star, and 1-star cavalry leaders, and we place them in their respective cups by rank. And we do the same process for the Union leaders. And whenever we have to reveal the identity of one of the untried leaders, we will draw from the respective cup depending on the leader's rank and whether he's a cavalry or a regular leader. We place all Confederate leaders scheduled for turn 1 in the Confederate leader pool. In a regular game, you would place the leaders face down, but since we're using the untried leader option, we will leave them face up, and when we select a leader, we will roll a die to select one randomly. Now we place the Union leaders that are scheduled for turn 1 in the Union leader pool. Note that the Union naval leaders have a name, they are revealed, and we will leave them face up. And as we stated before, when a leader will be picked, we will select the location where the leader will go, and then we will randomly select one of the leaders in the leader pool. So we begin turn number 1, summer, July, August 1861. And the first phase is the reinforcement phase. We begin by consulting this row, sea lift capacity, and the Union has a capacity of 2. And we mark it here in the general records track. Sea lift capacity is the number of strength points that the Union can move by sea each turn. Next, we see that the Union receives 1 river transport and 1 ocean-going transport, and we place them in the naval pool. And the Union will have to spend naval or discretionary commands to enter them into play. And here are the reinforcement points that the Union player receives: 3 in the east, 3 in the west, 1 in the Trans-Mississippi, and 2 discretionary reinforcement points. And we mark those here in the reinforcement tracks. Now for the Confederates, the rail capacity, the number of strength points that can be moved by rail each turn varies, and as the war progresses, the rail line deteriorates, the rail line network, and it'll be reduced. But we will keep track of Confederate rail capacity by using this black die. The Union rail capacity is always 6 per turn, and we will keep track of it using this green die, and we will have both of these dice by the side. And the Confederates receive, by way of reinforcement points for the first turn, 3 in the east, 3 in the west, 1 in the Trans-Mississippi, and 1 discretionary reinforcement point. And we mark the reinforcement points accordingly in the reinforcement tracks. Now, as to resource allocation, we will be using the solitaire rules, which have a Confederate resource allocation table, which will determine randomly the priorities for the Confederates each turn. Now, at the beginning of the game, also by special rule, the Confederates' priorities are primary, the Eastern Theater; secondary, the Western Theater; and the tertiary theater will be the Trans-Mississippi. Now to the command phase, and the Union will select its priorities for this turn. Its primary theater will be the East, secondary, the West, and tertiary theater, the Trans-Mississippi. Now each side rolls on the command points table, and the Union roll is a 7. And that is 6 command points in the East, 4 in the West, 1 in the Trans-Mississippi, 2 discretionary, and 2 naval command points. And we register those levels here in the command tracks. Now the Confederates roll 2 dice, and it's an 11. 5 commands in the East, 4 in the Trans-Mississippi, 2 in the West, and 2 discretionary command points. The Confederates never receive naval command points. And we mark the commands accordingly on the command track. And because we rolled once on the command points table, we place the marker in the number 1 box on the table use track. Now we allocate the command point priorities for the Union for the next turn, and we place them face down. The next turn primary is going to be West, secondary, East, and tertiary, the Trans-Mississippi. And as we stated before, during the next turn, the Confederates will roll on this table to determine what their priorities are. Now we go to the Confederate Commerce Raiders phase, but there are no Commerce Raiders in the At.sea box, so we skip this phase. Now we go to the blockade effects phase, and we determine the effect of the Union blockade on the Confederate ports, and that is how many import points the Confederates receive which are affected by the blockade. Now, we have totaled the number of port points that the Confederates have. We do not count Petersburg, Norfolk, nor do we count Pensacola, and all port points total 40, and we're including 7 port points that don't appear in the map. That would be part of the far west option map, and those are for ports in Texas. So the Confederates have 40 port points. Here we see the blockade table. The blockade percentage for turn 1 is 0%. That means that the blockade will not stop any imports from entering through the available Confederate ports. Now the port capacity in port points we just determined is 40, and it is here. So all 40 points enter. If there would be a blockade percentage of 10%, only 36 would enter. So if all 40 points enter, and we register that on the general records track. And we do that by adding the 40 points to the Confederate production level. So it's 100 plus 40, 140. And now we go to the actions phase, which is the heart of the game. In each actions phase, each side rolls 2 dice. The high roller has the initiative, and the difference between both die rolls is what is called the dice difference. And the larger the dice difference, the more actions and things that can be done by spending command points or bringing reinforcements. Now let's roll for the Union. And the roll is an 8. And now we roll for the Confederates. And the roll is a 7. So the Union wins the initiative. And the dice difference is the difference between both dice rolls. So it's 1. So the Union won the initiative by having the higher die roll. So we mark it. And the dice difference, the difference between both dice rolls, was a 1. Because the Union won the initiative, the Union can bring 1 reinforcement point onto the map or 1 leader without any cost to the dice difference. And that is the bonus that the initiative player during each pulse has. So judging by the situation here in the East, where the Union wants to get a leader to command those 3 strength points as quickly as possible, the Union will pick a leader randomly from the leader pool, and the leader will be placed in Washington. In this game, leaders that enter as reinforcements have to be placed in a hex containing a friendly strength point, like Washington for instance, or a depot. So we rolled a 7, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and it'll be this 1-star leader. And we place the leader in Washington. So now there are two leaders, a 3-star and a 1-star leader there. And now to the Union pulse, and the Union will spend its sole point of dice difference for the purpose of entering a strength point reinforcement from the Eastern Theater, and now the level goes down to 2. And reinforcement points enter the game on victory point cities or directly onto an existing army, but there are no armies in the game so far. All the strength points are part of what we call forces when they are commanded by leaders. So we will add 1 strength point to the Washington force, which currently has 7. Now it has 8. Now the Confederates spend their point of dice difference. And the Confederates will enter 1 reinforcement point in the Western Theater. And it will be placed in this victory point city, the very valuable port of New Orleans. So that's the end of that pulse, and now we begin a new pulse by rolling for both sides for initiative. The Union die roll is an 8. The Confederate die roll is a 6. So the Union wins the initiative again with a dice difference of 2. So now the Union can enter the free reinforcement, that is leader or strength point. The Union wants to get things going in the West. This hex here, Cairo, Illinois, is crucial. So the Union will place a leader there. And the random roll is a 7. So it is Andrew Foote. And Foote is a naval leader, and there are no naval forces yet in Cairo, but he is assigned there for now. The Union was hoping to get a leader to these 3 strength points. The problem is that the leader that entered is a 1-star leader. 1-star leaders can command forces of 1 or 2 strength points, not 3 like the force that needs some leadership here close to the Shenandoah Valley. So the Union will spend 1 point of dice difference to enter a leader in Washington. The random roll is a 2, so it is this 3-star leader. And we place the new leader together with the other 2 leaders in Washington. And now there are 3 leaders there, 2 of which have 3 stars. And the Union spends the last point of dice difference and 1 command point from the Eastern Theater to move one of their 3-star leaders 2 hexes here to command the force opposing the rebels in the Shenandoah Valley. Now the rebels have to spend 2 points of dice difference. As we see here, none of the leaders that are on the map can be activated with 2 commands. They need at least 3. So the rebels will spend both points of dice difference and 2 Eastern Theater command points to build the Army of Northern Virginia. And an army can be built in a supplied hex that has at least 1 3-star general and 1 strength point, and there are 4 strength points in this hex. So the Army of Northern Virginia is created. We leave the commanding general there, and we will give it a strength of 4 in the Confederate Army track. And now we roll for initiative again. The Union die roll is a 10. Confederate die roll, a 5. So the Union win once again the initiative, and this time the dice difference is 5. So now several things can happen, including the activation of forces. With a dice difference of 5, the Union could activate the force in Washington with its 3-star general and move to attack the Army of Northern Virginia. But first, the Union selects a reinforcement to enter for free, that is, at no cost of dice difference, and it will select a leader to enter in Washington. The roll is a 4, so this 2-star leader is placed in Washington where there are already now 2 additional leaders and 8 strength points. Now the Union spends 2 points of dice difference and 2 Eastern Theater command points for the purpose of building the Army of the Potomac, and we place the Army marker in Washington, and we leave the leaders there. And there's going to be 3 leaders, a 1, a 2, and a 3-star general. The 3-star general will be commanding. And because there were 8 strength points in Washington, we placed the strength marker for the Army of the Potomac here in the number 8 box. Now with 3 points of dice difference left, the Union spends all 3 and its 3 remaining Eastern command points for the purpose of activating the Army of the Potomac. The Army of the Potomac has 8 strength points, and it's not going to leave Washington unguarded, so it will leave 2 strength points in Washington. That reduces its strength to 6. So we leave 2 strength points, place it below the Army, and the Army now moves, and an Army can move up to 4 movement points, and the first hex it will move into will be this one. And it now announces that it will move into this hex occupied by the Union strength point. And that hex is in the reaction radius of the Army of Northern Virginia. So now the Army of Northern Virginia has to decide whether it will attempt to react or stay put. If it attempts to react and successfully reacts, it can react into the intended hex where the Army of the Potomac wants to move, or it can react away by moving into this, or this hex. And the Army of Northern Virginia will attempt to react, and that is one of the actions that causes that we have to reveal who the leader is. So we will draw one leader from the Confederate 3-star General Cup. So let's see who the general is, and it is, it is Pierre Gustave Toutant Beauregard. And coincidentally, Beauregard is the general that starts in that exact space in the 1861 campaign game. So now we have to roll 1d6 for Beauregard, and he will successfully react if the roll is higher than his command rating of 3. The result is a 2, so there's no successful reaction by Beauregard, so the Army of Northern Virginia stays put for now. And the Army of the Potomac moves onto the hex occupied by the lone Union strength point. Note that the Army of the Potomac cannot pick up that strength point. So it now has still 2 movement points to use. And the Army of the Potomac announces its intention of entering the hex where the Army of Northern Virginia is. There is no river, minor or major, between both hexes. So the Army of Northern Virginia would not have any column shift in its favor. There's no woods hex there either. So let's roll again for Beauregard to see if he can react. And this time Beauregard rolls a 6, so he can successfully react. And Beauregard crosses the Rappahannock and occupies the wooded hex to the south. The Army of the Potomac, 6 strength points strong, still has 1 movement point. It could conceivably cross the Rappahannock and attempt to attack Beauregard, but it will not move any further because Beauregard would have 2 column shifts, one for the navigable river and the other one for the forest. So that ends the move of the Army of the Potomac. So now the Confederates get to spend 5 points of dice difference. The Army of Northern Virginia only has 4 strength points as compared to the Army of the Potomac that has 6. So the rebels are outnumbered, but with a dice difference of 5, they will spend 1 dice difference to bring 1 reinforcement point, which can be placed directly into the Army of Northern Virginia, which is in supply, increasing its strength now to 5. A second dice difference point is spent for the purpose of bringing another leader into the Army of Northern Virginia. The random die roll is a 2, so a 1-star leader is added to Beauregard's staff. And the new leader does not have to be revealed at this time. Now the Confederates spend the remaining 3 points of dice difference, as well as 3 command points from the Eastern Theater, for the purpose of activating the Army of Northern Virginia. The Army announces its intention to attack the Army of the Potomac, and because they would be entering the Army of the Potomac's hex, the Army of the Potomac can now attempt to react, and it will do so, and that will cause that the commanding unknown or untried general of the Army of the Potomac has to be revealed. So we draw a counter from the Union 3-star general cup, and it is Butler. And he is just awful. To successfully react, Butler has to roll higher than his command rating of 4. He rolls a 4, he fails, so the Army of Northern Virginia enters the hex occupied by the Army of the Potomac, and we have ourselves a battle. So we have 5 rebel strength points attacking 6 Union strength points, a difference of -1. We start with the D column, but because the Confederates crossed an unnavigable river, there is 1 column shift to the left, and we will solve the attack on the C column. Now we have to reveal the identity of the other leaders in the battle, which may add their tactical die roll modifiers. Let's see which are the Union leaders. And we pick the leaders from the cup, and we have Joe Hooker, which is not a bad leader, not a bad 2-star leader. He adds a +1 die roll modifier. And we have Steele, who does not add anything to the battle. Now we reveal who the Confederate 1-star leader is. We pick the rebel leader from the cup, and it is Stonewall Jackson, who adds 2 to the rebel die roll. So the Union will have a die roll modifier of +1, and the rebels a +2 die roll modifier. Now let's check the reroll options that the Army commanders confer. Beauregard does not confer any reroll options to his or his enemy. However, Butler has a 2 in a red box. That means that he gives the Confederates 2 reroll options. So now we proceed to roll for both sides. First for the attackers. A 2 modified to a 4, and this combat is between both forces which are medium size. The result is 1 strength point loss on the Union Army. Now we roll for the Union. A 3 modified to a 4, demoralization and a loss of 1 strength point. So for now, the rebels are losing this fight, but they have 2 reroll options. And the rebels will use their first reroll option to reroll their die. So die roll is a 6 modified to an 8, and now the Confederates inflict a demoralization and 2 strength point loss on the Union force. So right now the Confederates are winning the fight. They still have 1 reroll option that could conceivably, with a lucky 1, reduce the Confederate loss result to just a 1, but that chance is very slim, so the Confederates will not exercise their second and last reroll option, and the result of this battle is that the Confederates win. So the Union lose 2 strength points and are demoralized. And the Confederates lose 1 strength point and are also demoralized. Now we roll for each leader participating in the battle once on the leader loss table. We will roll off camera and only show any results that inflict a wound or killed result against the leader involved in the battle. And we rolled for all participating leaders, and nobody suffered any wounds. Now we check for leader promotion. We see that Hooker, who is a 2-star general, can be promoted to 3 stars, and he survived unscratched this battle, so he's eligible for promotion, as well as Steele, and also Stonewall Jackson. Butler and Beauregard are not eligible because they start the game at their maximum rank. Jackson is eligible for promotion in the 2nd turn, as well as Hooker and Steele. So the result of the first battle is that the Army of the Potomac has to retreat, and it retreats onto the hex where there are Union troops already there, 1 strength point, and although the rebels won, both sides are demoralized. And we will mark both armies with demoralization markers. We will use these semi-transparent discs in lieu of the demoralization markers that the game brings, so we can see who are the commanding generals of each of the armies. Now we roll for initiative once again for the next pulse. The Union die roll is a 6, and the Confederate die roll is a 5. And it is important to note that if both sides roll the same dice result, there's a possibility that the action phase may end right there, and if it doesn't, both sides roll again on the commands points table. We add new command points and the action phase continues. But here the Union won the die roll with a dice difference of 1, so first they enter their free reinforcement. And the Union will enter a reinforcement point in the Western Theater in Cairo, Illinois, so now the Union has 2 strength points there. Now the Union spends its sole dice difference point and 1 West command point for the purpose of moving 1 of 2 strength points here in Springfield, Illinois, using rail movement in order to reach Cairo, Illinois, where the Union now has 3 strength points and naval leader Foote. Now the Confederates spend their point of dice difference to enter 1 reinforcement point in the West. The reinforcement point will be entered at Nashville, where there's a 3-star general, so now the Confederates have 2 strength points there. Now we roll for initiative again. The Union die roll is a 9. The Confederate die roll, a 6. And the Union is winning a lot of these initiative die rolls, so now we enter a free reinforcement. With the recent Union buildup here in Cairo, the Union need a general there to command those land forces. So they randomly select this 2-star general, and he's placed in Cairo. In the east, both armies are facing each other and are demoralized. To rally the Army of the Potomac, Ben Butler has to spend 4 command points. And that's a lot of command points, and it's very difficult in this game to get a spread of dice difference of 4 repeatedly in this game. And in any event, the Union doesn't have enough command points to rally the Army of the Potomac, only 2 discretionary command points. So the Union will spend 1 dice difference point for the purpose of adding another leader to the Army of the Potomac. And we select randomly this 3-star general, and we place the general in the Army of the Potomac, which remains demoralized. Now the Union spends its last 2 points of dice difference for the purpose of removing Ben Butler as the commanding general of the Army of the Potomac, and we remove his counter from the game because he's a 3-star general. He's not being demoted. And we place him in the removed leader's box. Now the Army of the Potomac is commanded by the untried three-star leader, and his identity is not revealed at this time. Now the Confederates spend all 3 points of dice difference and 3 trans-Mississippi command points for the purpose of activating this leader, who is commanding 2 rebel strength points, and the leader moves into Springfield to battle the Union forces there. That will cause that the identity of both leaders be revealed. And this battle is important because if the Confederates do not control one victory point city in Missouri, that state will convert as a Union state. So we have 2 Confederate strength points against 1 Union strength point, a 2-to-1 attack. There are no column shifts. And now we reveal the identity of both leaders. And the Confederate leader is A.P. Hill, who gives his side a +2 die roll modifier, and the Union leader, John Schofield, who does not give any die roll modifier to his side. There are no reroll options in this combat because it doesn't involve any armies, so now we roll the dice for each of the sides. The Confederates roll a 4 modified to a 6, and they inflict demoralization and 1 strength point loss on the Union side. The Union rolls a 5 with no modification, and it only demoralizes the Confederates. So now we inflict the combat results on each of the forces. The Union force is wiped out. Now we roll for leader loss, but none of the leaders are affected. Both leaders are eligible for a promotion, and we place their promotion counters, their 2-star counters, with the leaders that will enter in game turn number 2. Because Schofield's force was wiped out, he would normally go to the turn record track, but we already have there his promoted version. So we just removed the 1-star counter from the game. So the Confederates, although demoralized, are able to take Springfield, Missouri, which is a 1 victory point city. With the capture of Springfield, Missouri, the Confederates gain 1 victory point, and the Union lose 1, and their score is now at 8. We move on to another initiative die roll. 9 for the Union, and 8 for the Confederates. So only 1 point of dice difference for this pulse, and now we enter a Union reinforcement for free. The Union will have to do something about Kentucky. There's no Confederate movement so far into Kentucky, and the Union can consider invading Kentucky themselves, but their forces are scattered throughout Indiana and Ohio. So the Union will pick a free leader to be placed in New Albany, Indiana. Since both are 3-star generals, it won't make any difference. We pick one. And the generals placed here in New Albany, Indiana. Now the Union spends its point of dice difference to enter 1 reinforcement in the west. And it will enter also at New Albany, increasing the Union strength there to 2. Now the Confederates spend their point of dice difference and a western reinforcement point for the purpose of placing a reinforcement point here in Memphis, Tennessee, where the Confederates now have 3 strength points. Another initiative die roll. The Union die roll is 10. We keep rolling high numbers. The Confederates, 7. So the dice difference is 3, and the Union enters a free reinforcement. This time the Union spends 1 reinforcement point from the Trans-Mississippi Theater to increase the size of its forces in St. Louis to 3 strength points. And the Union spends 1 point of dice difference and a western reinforcement point to continue its buildup at Cairo, Illinois, and now They have 4 strength points there. Now the Union spends the remaining 2 points of dice difference and its 2 naval command points for the purpose of entering all of its naval reinforcements in this turn. The ocean-going transport will be placed here in Philadelphia, which has access to the ocean. And the riverine transport will be placed here in Cairo together with naval leader Foote. And the buildup continues. Now the Confederates can spend their 3 points of dice difference. However, there's not many options in terms of theaters. Only in the West can the Confederates actually activate one of their leaders. They would have to use both West command points and one of their discretionaries. With the recent Union buildup here in Cairo, which now includes riverine transports, the Confederates have to try to protect their control of the Mississippi as much as they can. So they spend all 3 points of dice difference and 2 Western theater and 1 discretionary command point to build a fort. A fort can be built in a hex that is in supply and has at least 1 strength point. So it will be built here in Memphis, Tennessee, which is one of the cities adjacent to the Mississippi River. And we roll for initiative once again. Union die roll this time is a 6. Confederate die roll, a 5. The Union keeps winning these die rolls, but not by a wide margin. So now the Union enters a free reinforcement. The Union will enter a reinforcement point that will be placed with the Army of the Potomac, increasing its strength now to 5. Now the Union uses its sole point of dice difference to enter 1 discretional reinforcement in the Trans-Mississippi. The reinforcement will add to the forces in St. Louis, increasing their strength to 4. The Confederates now spend their point of dice difference, as well as their last Trans-Mississippi command point, for the purpose of activating this 1 strength point unit, and it will move to this mountain road hex. And we roll again for initiative. The Union die roll is 11. It's pretty high. Confederate die roll is 3. So this is an 8 dice difference here. So the Union enters its free reinforcement. The Union will pick the remaining leader from their leader pool and place him in Cairo, Illinois, where there are 2 more leaders, including naval leader Foote. Now the Union has to spend a dice difference of 8. They have 6 commands left and 2 reinforcements left. So after they spend all this dice difference, they will have no commands and no reinforcements. So the Union begins by spending 2 points of dice difference to enter a reinforcement strength point in the east and a discretionary reinforcement strength point that will enter in the west. The east reinforcement will be placed with the Army of the Potomac, increasing the Army's strength to 6. The discretionary reinforcement point will be placed in Cairo, Illinois, increasing the strength of the Union forces there to 5. Now the Union spends 3 points of dice difference and its 3 remaining Western theater command points for the purpose of activating one of their 2 land leaders there in Cairo. They will activate the 2-star general, and of the 5 strength points in Cairo, 1 Union strength point will remain at Cairo with the 3-star general, Foote, and the riverine transport, and the 2-star general will move 2 hexes, the first one to cross the Mississippi into the swampland, and the second hex into the hex occupied by the lone rebel strength point, and we will resolve a battle. And we will resolve this particular battle on the map. We first reveal who the 2-star Union leader is. So we draw a leader from the cup, and it is McClernand. McClernand, as you see, is one of those atrocious Union leaders. Now the odds here are 4-1, but the swamp hex where the defender is provides one column shift to the left, so now it is 3-1. As to die roll modifiers, McClernand has a 1 in a red box, so he gives the Confederates a die roll modifier of 1. So the attackers are the Union, so we roll first for the Union, which has a medium force. The roll is a 6, defender demoralized, and 2 strength point lost. That will cause the elimination of the Confederate defending force. But now we roll for the Confederates. A 3 modified to a 4, no effect. So the defending Confederate force is eliminated, and now we roll for possible leader loss on McClernand. He rolled a 2. If he would have been a 3-star leader, he would have been killed or wounded, but otherwise there's no effect. And that's the end of the battle. The Union now spends its last 3 points of dice difference and a command point from the Trans-Mississippi and 2 from the discretionary category. To activate this Union force, it has 4 strength points. It'll move by regular movement here to Rolla, where there is a Union depot. Now the Confederates have to spend 8 points of dice difference. In terms of moving units around, the Confederates won't be able to do much. They only have 1 discretionary command point. They have 4 strength point reinforcements and 5 reinforcements that are leaders. So the Confederates will spend 5 of their 8 dice difference points to enter all the leaders that they have left in the leader pool. We'll start by selecting randomly 1 general to go to the Army of Northern Virginia. The roll is a 4, so the cavalry leader joins Beauregard and Stonewall Jackson in the Army of Northern Virginia. The next general will also be placed with the Army of Northern Virginia. And we select a 1-star general. Now the Army of Northern Virginia has a commanding general and 3 subordinates, including a cavalry leader. The next leader will be placed with the rebel forces in Memphis, Tennessee. We will roll a die 1 to 2, 3 and 4, and 5 and 6. And the 1-star leader is selected. And the rebels have now 2 leaders in Memphis with 3 strength points and a fortification. The next randomly selected leader will be placed in Richmond 1 to 3, 4 to 6. And a 4. So the 3-star general is placed in Richmond, where there are 2 rebel strength points. Finally, the last leader will go with the Army of Northern Virginia. And the Army of Northern Virginia has a commanding general and 4 subordinates. Now the Confederates spend their last 3 points of dice difference to enter their remaining reinforcements, 2 points in the east, 1 in the Trans-Mississippi, and the discretionary point will be used to enter a strength point in the west. First, the 2 strength points in the east, 1 will go to the Army of Northern Virginia, which now increases its strength to 5, and the other strength point will appear in Richmond, and the force there now has 3 strength points. The discretionary strength point will be placed in the west, specifically in Nashville, increasing the strength of the rebel forces there to 3. And the Trans-Mississippi reinforcement strength point will be placed here in Fayetteville, Arkansas. The Union has no leaders to enter, no reinforcement strength points, nor command points left. The rebels have no leaders to enter, no reinforcement strength points, but they still have one discretionary command point, so we roll again for initiative. The Union die roll is a 7. The Confederate die roll is an 8. And this is the first time in the game that the Confederates win the initiative, and this time with a dice difference of 1, and they can enter a free reinforcement, strength point, or leader, but they have none available to enter. So they'll spend their sole point of dice difference and their last command point, a discretionary command point, to move this strength point, which is in Fredericksburg, 4 hexes to join this Confederate force at the northern end of the Shenandoah Valley. Now the rebels have 3 strength points there. Now it would correspond to the Union to spend 1 point of dice difference, but they don't have anything to spend it on. So this is the end of the actions phase for this first turn. Now to the command points table use phase. We use the command points table once, as signified by that number 1. So we move the command points table total marker to the number 1 box in the general records track. Now to the rally phase, and we remove demoralization markers from forces and armies at this time if they are in supply, and both the Army of Northern Virginia and Army of the Potomac are in supply, so we remove the demoralization markers. But each army suffers a penalty of losing 1 strength point. So the Army of the Potomac strength goes down to 5, and that of the Army of Northern Virginia down to 4 strength points. We remove the demoralization marker from A.P. Hill's force, but it also loses 1 strength point. And that's the end of the first turn, so we advance a marker to turn number 2, autumn, September-October 1861. Let's check the situation at the end of turn 1 in each of the theaters. The Army of the Potomac advanced up to this hex here, crossing the Rappahannock, but aggressive action by the Army of Northern Virginia pushed it back, and the Union sacked its incompetent general, that is Benjamin Butler. Now the Union has a leader here to face the rebels in the Shenandoah Valley. In the Virginia Peninsula, there is a Union force bottled up here in Fort Monroe, and rebel forces have started to gather around Richmond with a 3-star general. In West Virginia, the situation remains the same as when the game started. The Union failed to take Charleston. With 1 command point from the east, this strength point could have just marched in, and the state would be in Union control, and the Union would have received conversion victory points for the state. In Kentucky, neither of the sides entered the state, so they have been building up their forces. The Union here, a small buildup in New Albany. They currently have 10,000 men there, and they still have more forces scattered around Indiana and Ohio. The Confederates have 2 strength points here in Nashville, and they still have their fort here guarding the approaches to the Cumberland and Tennessee rivers. Also in the West, the Union made a buildup of forces in Cairo, detached a force of 20,000 men that wiped out 5,000 rebels holding this position here, and it appears that the Union will be advancing through this route into northern Tennessee, northwestern Tennessee, to avoid violating the neutrality of Kentucky. The Confederate forces in Memphis are composed of 15,000 men, 3 strength points, and currently have 2 leaders, and there is also a fort there. In the Trans-Mississippi, A.P. Hill took Springfield, which was occupied by Union troops, by defeating Schofield. He has 2 strength points, and there are 2 additional strength points on the way to reinforce him. Although he's a 1-star general, he can only move a maximum of 2. The Union forces are bent on defeating him. A 3-star general with 4 combat factors is currently in Rolla and is on A.P. Hill's way. So the Union was not able to take control of Missouri in this turn. And here we see the general records track at the end of the turn. The Union did not move any units by sea, so the sea lift capacity is returned to 0. The Confederates gained control of Springfield, Missouri, and the command points table total is 1, so the Confederates have 2 victory points. The Union, because of control of cities in West Virginia and the remaining cities in Missouri, has 8 victory points. That's the end of the first turn of the 1861 scenario of Victory Games the Civil War. I will see you next with turn number 2. So this is Stuka Joe signing off for now. Thanks for watching.